Welcome to the Unsexy Entrepreneurship Podcast. Everything you need to know for millennials looking to start, acquire, or grow a business. With CPA and entrepreneur Charles Harris and director of the Entrepreneurship Institute, Dr. Seth Jenson. This is the Unsexy Entrepreneurship Podcast.
Welcome to the Unsexy Entrepreneurship Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about entrepreneurship through acquisition versus a 0 to 1. So for the sake of this, we're going to call entrepreneurship through acquisition as ETA. It's kind of the hip term these days. Seth knows what I'm talking about. We hear about it all the time. It is, I think MBAs go straight from their MBA to ETA sometimes. Boy, that would make me nervous as an investor or those giving a loan, but there are ways to do that. And then 0 to 1, I think, is what we think about when we say starting a business. So let's first break it down. What is entrepreneurship through acquisition?
Yeah. So basically it's saying, hey, I don't want to build something from scratch. There's all of these businesses in the world that are looking for new homes, so to speak, people that are retiring, people that are just tired, want to get out of the game or want to do something else with their life. So they're looking to sell a business and you can come in and purchase it and kind of step into that operator owner role, right? Day one. But it's still kind of entrepreneurship because, you're taking over this new, somebody else's baby and taking on all the baggage and rebuilding that comes with that, right? So you're still able to, usually there's an eye towards, okay, how do I grow this business? How do I improve the operations? You have to take a very entrepreneurial mindset, even though hopefully it's got some good cash flow already happening. It might already have some structures. It's applying that entrepreneurial hat to an existing business and kind of stepping in day, 1000 instead of day one.
Yeah, I think Walker Dybell is probably the leading voice in the field for ETA. I don't know, that might be wrong too, but that's what I've seen at least. And I think the real benefits is you have cash flow right at the beginning. We're going to talk about the pros and cons, but something you mentioned earlier, I think before we got online, was how many business owners are getting older, let's say, to be nice.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Do you have statistics for the US or just Utah?
Yeah, well, right before we logged on here, I was meeting with a bunch of local universities and investors. We're building out a whole program that's helping students acquire businesses along with some mentors and investors. But in my state, 40% of all the businesses in this state are owned by people 55 and older. So that's crazy because it means in the next 20 years, probably more realistically, the next 10 years, 40% of businesses are going to change ownership because most people don't want to be waking up and open up shop at 75 years old. They want to exit the business, move to the Bahamas, and let that big payout kind of pay for their lifestyle. So 40% of businesses in my state are going to get passed down in the family, get sold to some private equity firm, or go on the market for someone to buy and kind of become, again, an owner-operator. And I think it's important to recognize as we think about this ETA space, there's some businesses that are really hard to find homes for. And these are good businesses. These are businesses that are cash flowing, $500,000 to, even $3, $4, $5 million a year, but they're still small enough or, unique enough that big firms don't want to buy them. Private equity firms whose job are literally buying businesses, improving them, and selling them, they're not interested in businesses at that scale. So if you're an individual wanting to do ETA, the number of businesses in that kind of it's really small by business standards range, there's a lot of opportunities there. There's less competition for them. And again, because of that generational change, there's going to hopefully be a big flood of them available to aspiring entrepreneurs.
Yeah, this is the big reason why I wanted to focus on millennials. Partly that we are, but partly because I think millennials have constantly complained that we've always hit bad economic situations.
Yeah.
Between the 2008 recession, 2009, and COVID and all these things, as during our prime earning years and getting into them, we've kind of missed a lot. But jumping into business for yourself and buying these businesses in a lot of ways can make up lost ground pretty significantly, pretty quickly. And it's just a really cool opportunity. Doesn't mean that we should do it necessarily. Got to make sure it's the right situation. Just don't go out and buy a business, but it really is a cool opportunity. Another statistic I heard too, and boy, I don't know if it's 100% right, but I have several business brokers that I am friends with and I network with, and they've said about 90% of businesses go unsold.
Yeah, I believe it.
Which means that there's a huge opportunity if you can get yourself into the right situation, talk to the right people. And sometimes entrepreneurship through acquisition, we think it has to be on biz buy sell or something like that.
Mhm.
And that's just not the case. Sometimes it just is going to the people where they are. So I don't know if I will ever buy a business, but I've been talking to older CPAs that I'm around and networking with and just saying, hey, if you're ever going to sell, at least give me a holler, let me know, because most of the time they don't have a plan. They don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And just getting any money from the sale would be useful. So entrepreneurship through acquisition is a really cool avenue. And we're going to talk about it more in a second. The other side of the coin, which I think is probably the more well-known or most thought of as entrepreneurship, is that 0 to 1. And what do we mean when we say 0 to 1? Why is that the term for this type of business?
Yeah. So the kind of traditional path we might think of entrepreneurship is, hey, I've got an idea. I've got this dream for how the world could be. It's not like that now. It doesn't exist, but I'm going to go hustle and make it happen. Maybe it's a product that doesn't exist, or I want to be a competitor in a space, or whatever it is. But you basically take an idea, you validate the idea, you organize the component parts to bring it about in the world, and then you launch and sell it to the world. I think 0 to 1 is actually a really good term, because sometimes it feels like -1 to 1, like the inertia it takes to get something that's just a dream into the real world can be painful. It's a labor of love often, but it's usually a lot of lifting and difficulty. But that's where innovation happens so often, right? Like our economy thrives on people bringing things to life in it, making things better and new. And it can be incredibly lucrative, right? Like when we think of the big entrepreneurs that have shaped society, they struggled through the early Amazon book selling years to get to the Amazon behemoth that's, putting satellites into the, to give us internet or whatever it might be. There's that traditional path is, we'll go into the pros and cons, but it's kind of the American dream, make something from nothing story.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think 0 to 1 has to be that risky, but we'll talk about that more in a second. But what I really love about 0 to 1 is when you get that one, this is why I love how we phrase it, is when you get that one, it is life-changing. You make that one random sell online. I worked for a startup prior to my own, and they had a video of putting their product on the market and getting that first sale.
Yeah.
And just everyone like cheering and going crazy, because that is such a big deal. And it turns an idea into something proven almost.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, one isn't going to prove anything, but it's just such a interesting like step. Yeah. Anyway, so I love that moment, and that sale is just so invigorating.
I call it the light bulb moment for my students. It's life-changing. Steve Jobs, I know we've already referenced Steve Jobs like 3 times too many in this podcast. It's so cliche, but he's got this amazing interview he did, very young Steve Jobs. You can find it on YouTube, but he basically says that everyone kind of grows up thinking the world is just the way it is, that has always been that way. But eventually you'll realize that everything you see was made by somebody just like you. Like every amazing business you respect, every product that you use, somebody built that. And it's the way it is because they made it that way. And he puts it like, we realize you poke life, something comes out the other end. And that's just really empowering that you can shape it, right? You can bring something to life and shape communities, build a fan base. It's that's why entrepreneurship is so inspirational, right? It's this combination of art and business all in one place. So I think I love that, you talk about that moment when somebody first hands over that dollar bill or $1 million bill to buy your product, and you're like, they're only able to do that because I built this. Like I built something in the world and people love it so much, they're desperate to give me their money for it. That's cool.
Yeah, it's bizarre that it happens. Let's go through some of the pros and the cons of both of these, because these are kind of the 2 main ways of entrepreneurship. I'm not aware of any other types, but I'm not going to give an absolute because I'm an accountant. So let's go through some of the pros of ETA. So I'm going to speak from my side because I'm an accountant. So if you're buying a business, you immediately have cash flow. Cash flow is the fancy term for you receive revenue and then you spend money. And then what's left over is the cash flow. So obviously we want a bigger cash flow because then it means we're putting more money in the bank than we're spending. And it's a little bit different than a net income in the fact that this is actual physical cash, not just income or expenses that we will pay. That goes into more of an accounting world. But what I love about this
I love hearing
is
your little accounting brain, not a little, your prodigious accounting brain, see the world in inflows and outflows.
but
Only an
cash flow
accountant
is
would be like, the
awesome.
revenue is not real, because for an entrepreneur, they're like, yes, we just did $1 million in revenue. And the accountant's like, yeah, but you only get to keep 100,000 of it. So it's not like,
Yeah.
not real.
Well,
But
and that's
it's
a whole
valuable.
other problem that we'll talk about, I'm sure. Revenue's not real, but net income and cash flow are real, and they're kind of synonymous. For this example, we're going to keep them kind of the same. Obviously, they're different. What I love is the cash flow comes in. So I have a client, I can't tell you names or anything like that, but bought a business, was immediately cash flowing 10 grand a month. This is after loans, after paying all of his employees, all the other expenses. That is a big deal for an entrepreneur. That gives you space to then grow the business, experiment, figure things out,
Pay yourself.
which you can't do at a 0 to 1. If you sell one product, it's not, well, depends on the product, but generally it's not going to pay the bills. And so I think that's a huge advantage of ETA, is that you get that cash flow right off the bat.
Definitely. And it kind of speaks to this other pro, which is it's proven, right? You're buying a business that has a history to it. And that included in that history is a sales history that shows that people want this product, right? And we'll go in depth in future podcasts about going through the financials of businesses you're looking to buy and really understanding what it should look like, what's good, what's bad, where they might be trying to, hide things, those types of things. But when you buy a business, they show you your books and you're like, wow, there's tens, hundreds, thousands, millions of customers that have been buying this consistently for these years. So you're able to say, yes, my product is valued. Yes, I can build a business on this because it already has been done. Like I just need, as long as I don't break it, it's going to keep doing, providing this value for customers. And that's huge, right? Because 0 to 1, you don't have that guarantee. And you could build something that you're really excited about that seems really validated as you kind of experiment in those early stages, but there's just no time-bound guarantee you're going to be successful. I think any 0 to 1, you can eventually be successful, but it could take 2 years, or it could take 2 months, 2 years, 5 years, 20 years, right? Whereas if you're buying the business, the concept's already proven, which is also just a relief. Like some people need that. They're willing to accept that risk profile of running a business as opposed to the risk profile of starting a business. And so I think that's a great way to kind of litmus test your own personality and path.
And I'll reference Walker Diabell a few times during the ETA section because his book Buy Them Build is a great resource. But he specifically talks about how startups that are ETA versus 0 to 1, generally ETA fail less of the time than 0 to 1. And we will argue that point a little bit in 0 to 1 too, because I have strong feelings on that. But I think if you're looking for a strong business, you don't want to have a boss, but you also want to make sure you have a business that works, I think ETA can be a really good option. And so I think with this, you have to think about what the purpose of ETA is. Generally, you can buy it, and it's kind of like buying a job, which I think is a little bit of a con, but you can also buy a business and with plans to improve, right? So if you bought a business that has 0 online footprint, right? Like that's a clear indication you can come in with some marketing, put up a website. You laugh at this day and age in 2025 not having a website, but there are lots of businesses that still don't.
Right.
And so you can kind of come into it as an operation, think of how to improve it to really grow the business, right? So it's not just because you're buying a business doesn't mean you're not an entrepreneur. It's just changing the look of it a little bit.
Absolutely. And to your point, there's so many awesome businesses with good bones, so to speak, a really great product, a consistent customer base, and yet these huge areas for improvement for those that are, like you say, entrepreneurial or operationally minded. There's some kind of glow up opportunities. If we want to use, that you can really glow up a business and, in some cases, will triple, quadruple sales from some very, well-known, safe adjustments to the kind of the business plan or the strategy. Now, I will say, people always buy businesses with these big dreams. You tend to find out that the previous owners of the businesses weren't as stupid as you like to think they are in their head. Turns out they've probably tried half the things you're about to try, right? it's, go in it humbly is my suggestion, because it seems like it's going to be so easy before you actually officially put on the manager badge and go actually experience it for yourself. But that being said, there's usually some great ways that you can really, glow up the business, level it up, and increase, improve your margins, grow the customer base, improve retention. You've already got something to work with. And so it's about improving and scaling as opposed to inventing,
Right.
which is awesome.
Yeah. And one thing that scares me about ETA personally is it's going to depend on the business. And we're going to talk more about that. But you have to be careful about what business you're buying. And with ETA, you have to make the full jump. It's usually not like I'll buy this business and work on it 5 hours a week. Generally speaking, you kind of have to jump in. There are some businesses you can buy that are only 5 hours a week, but those are cheap and they're not really an entrepreneur business in some ways. So I think that is a concern too that I've seen, right? You're going to jump in, you're going to quit your job, and then you're going to be at a loss if it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Which can be a little bit scary too. And so we talk about less failure, but because you're jumping in fully, I think in a lot of ways it's just as high.
Well, and think of it as buying, and when you're going 0 to 1, you're just slowly onboarding responsibilities as you grow. You can go and be like, oh, I'm just playing around with this idea, and then, oh, I'm going to, invest some money to get it prototyped, and that's a little bit of responsibility. And, oh, I'm going to hire my first person, that's a little responsibility. When you're buying a business through ETA, you're just buying a ton of responsibility all at once. Like, you're just taking the whole package. So, in Seth's case, you're going from 0 to 100 on the responsibility scale. And to your point, that usually means you can't just kind of go in, 1 foot in and 1 foot out. You've got to, full butt it if you're going to use a almost crass term.
But this can be really good for, someone that's been in corporate operations for the last 12 years, but they don't really feel like they have any ideas. They're not really an entrepreneur, right? ETA can be awesome for that. Something else I want to talk about too is for ETA, there's going to be cash up front, and you're going to hear influencers and people say, hey, you don't need any money to buy a business. That might be true in less than 1% of the deals. And I mean, if you can find it where it's 100% owner seller financing, by all means, power to you. But generally speaking, you're going to have to put at least 10% down, which even at a company that's only generating $500,000 a year, you're looking at least at $50,000 probably, if not more. And so there is more of a cost to ETA in a lot of ways. And if you're not saving a lot of money, if you're not being frugal now, it's really hard to get into that space.
You're exactly right. And the less you put in, most of the time, that means the less you own, because you're going to have to, sometimes you can get a loan that'll cover, but SBA loans are very difficult to get. Like, it's not an easy process. You have to have really good credit. You usually need to put down collateral. Like, it is not a walk in the park to get loans. And so if you're bringing on
and
an
investor,
investor,
they can take like a year to get to. They can take a really long time.
Yeah. And maybe that opportunity's dried up by then, right?
Right.
Timing can be an issue. So you might mean you bring on a co-investor, right, that puts up the money and you kind of put in the sweat equity. But now all of a sudden you own less of that company. So the upside for you is less and the control is less. Someone else is whispering in your ear what needs to be done.
Again, it just turns into a job, which is a concern.
Exactly, right? And I think that's really important. And that's true of 0 to 1 and ETA. At some point, especially if you take investors, you're going to have a boss. If you bootstrap the entire thing, you can go almost boss free throughout the entrepreneurship experience. Although in some ways you're beholden to your clients. There's usually some group of stakeholders that are telling you what to do. And so there's kind of an asterisk next to that boss free thing, right? You may not have a boss, but someone still expects you to answer the phone at 3 a.m. sometimes. And maybe that's not your boss, but it's still someone who's making you get out of bed and wire transfer some money to India or something. So, but investors, as you go through that ETA process, if you're not able to put significant money down, that might mean you're giving away part of your company. You might be risking your home or something to put down the collateral for the loan. There are, and you alluded to these. We talked about de-risking. By all means, go be creative. Go see if you can establish really great, seller's note type situation, seller's financing. De-risk the financing and buying process in the same way you de-risk any element of your business, but there are limitations to it, right? And sometimes sellers will only sell a certain path, and that makes sense. So that cash up front or that necessary investment to get started is definitely one con compared to the 0 to 1. And then the last con I would maybe tack onto our list here, which I think is so important, is the skeletons in the closet. Of if you buy a business, you're buying some baggage, and you might not be aware of all the baggage when you first
I have
sign
so
that
many
agreement.
stories on this because every ETA client I've ever worked with has some baggage, and some of it is okay, and some of it is terrifying.
Yeah.
So
Give us some examples.
yeah. So the simplest example, the previous owner had everyone as a contractor when they were clearly employees, which is an easy switch, but it changes the profitability of the company because employees are more expensive. You have to pay taxes, 7.65%. additionally on everyone's salary. And then there are other benefits included too, like paid time off and things that you just have to offer if you want to have employees. I guess you don't have to, but good luck keeping employees.
Well, and to be clear, that distinction is a legal one, right? So it wasn't like they had like they were basically, it was almost illegal in what they were doing, right? Like these were people that were operating
The IRS
as
could
employees.
have come in. Yeah, the IRS could have come in, fined him a ton of money, and he would have been in big trouble. And so one of the first things after he bought the business was switch everyone to employees, lowers the profitability of the company. He's still doing okay, but it's a lot tighter than the hypothetical purchasing of the company. And honestly, in his situation, I don't think he did enough research into that side or understood enough, right? He didn't have the right people in his corner until post purchase, which can also be a concern. And then on the other side, which there was another one that I worked with, or I work with, and I think they definitely knew what they were doing when they bought the company. They understood there were skeletons in the closet, but they were reporting less income in the business than they were actually receiving. And they did this mainly to avoid taxation. Honestly, it didn't hurt my client very much because they're not liable for past mistakes, and they got a lower purchase price because it was valued less because you use tax returns to value a company and P&L. And if they're not reporting it, then it's worth less. And so the previous owner actually was the one that kind of got hit and dinged on that one. Probably could have gotten significantly more money because revenue went up about 20%.
Interesting.
But there was a sticky note with real revenue numbers versus what was reported, right?
Gosh.
Just crazy. And again, like I said, I don't think it hurt my client at all, except getting the SBA loan took a little bit longer because clearly something was going on, but we couldn't figure out exactly what was happening. But luckily for them, it worked out okay. But
you can imagine the reverse being true too, right? Where,
yeah,
they've been operating on these assumptions, but they're really kind of fudging or
to inflate the selling price, right?
Yeah.
They could have been aware that they were going to sell it in the next 2 years, started inflating numbers. Like it could have turned out really bad for my client. Luckily it didn't. They weren't that sophisticated, but skeletons can be a big deal. Those are the two stories that come to mind immediately. But boy, I would be shocked if there's any ETA transaction where you don't find something that's a little bit funny.
Ones that come to my mind are, you've got this big, beautiful client list that they're like, you're going to have all of these. And then as soon as you buy that company, you realize that 90% of these are really just straw men, right? Like they're past customers that haven't been involved for years, or they're all in the middle of a transition to a different company. There's another one comes to mind is really onerous financing things where the debt structure of the company is such that you're locked into these terms that could really sink the company. Again, in your due diligence process, none of this should come as a surprise, but sometimes there's some fine print and stuff where at the end of the day, when reality meets, hits the road, so to speak, it's usually not as pretty a picture as it was in the room when you signed the agreement. And so it involves pivoting and rebuilding and kind of adjusting. But yeah, I think it's a pretty good list. So the pros we listed for ETA were, man, that cash flow is really nice to have day one. You've got a proven concept. You're not wondering, oh my gosh, are people going to buy this? Is it going to work out? Can I get stakeholders involved? It's really good if you're operationally minded. There's room for entrepreneurship and improvement. You can go in there and grow a company. And so if you're that's your jam, is going in and fixing things and improving processes, it's a really fun place to play. The cons we listed, in some sense, you're buying a job. You might have a boss day one in certain circumstances, depending on your financing and things. You really have to go all in. You can't just kind of have this be a side project as you continue on your normal career, so to speak, or your previous career. It's cash intensive. You're going to need to come up with money to purchase this. And I'll just add to that, I was just in a room literally before this with 2 investors that have acquired numerous businesses between them. And anytime they're bringing on an operator to help them run their business, they require them to put money in. Even if the bulk of the money is coming from the investor, they want that operator to have skin in the game. I think that really goes to show there's no free lunch when it comes to ETA. Like, you have to be ready to commit resources up front. And then the last con we talked about was those skeletons in the closet and those unpleasant surprises post-purchase that you're definitely going to run into. But yeah, let's talk about some of the 0 to 1 pros then. So why is 0 to 1 special?
Well, I love 0 to 1 because you can de-risk the whole process. And I know we talked about this before, but you can get that first client while still having a full-time job. It's safe in that sense. Definitely people quit their jobs and try and do 0 to 1, which to me is really risky and terrifying. But if you're smart about it, you can side hustle it. You can make sure it works, that it's a proven concept before you make the leap. I think to me, that's one of the biggest advantages that I saw when I did it myself. Because I spent 6 months between the first client and when I quit. And so it felt safe, because worst case scenario, my clients hate me, they all quit, and I still have a nice paying job. I'll be a little bit sad and disappointed, but it wouldn't be the end of the world.
Real quick, Trey, I'm curious to hear, what was it like wearing both of those hats simultaneously? You know, you were an entrepreneur by night and an accountant by day. How did that feel?
Overwhelming, exhausting, exhilarating. It was interesting, right? Like, and I'm lucky my wife was pretty on board with it too. Because I had kids, and boy, I was less available than I was before. And it was hard too, right? Like, I hopefully no one from my previous company listens to this, but on Friday, we had a work from home day, and I would slip out, go to a networking event in the morning, and then get back to work at like 9:30, and hope no one noticed and that it was okay.
So rebellious, Charlie.
I know.
Those 30 minutes, oh my goodness. I should report you.
But I mean, it was hard, right? I definitely do not think side hustling is easy, but it was so much safer. I think the biggest problem I ran into doing a side hustle is the last month or 2, I really didn't care about my job.
Yeah.
And I think many people are better than me, but I like to think about the future. I like to move forward constantly. And so it was very hard to focus on my normal job that I was getting paid a lot more money for than my side hustle that I was barely making any money with. I think that was the hardest point for me.
It's true. And, you know, I'm a side hustler, right? Like my consulting practice happens outside of my 9-to-5 hours, and I love my 9-to-5 job. And, you know, there might come a day when my consulting work builds up to the point where I just feel more passionate about that. I love my current job too much to let my consulting practice eat it currently, but that might flip, right? But there's definitely those moments where you're torn between the two. You've only got one pool of emotional and mental resources, and you've got both of those things pulling from it. So I do think that's really important. That's kind of, we're listing both a pro and a con for this first one here, because, you know, I'm able to take really big swings in my consulting practice and go after kind of the biggest, highest clientele base, because I don't have to pay the bills. I've got this safe thing. And so I'm actually able to be more entrepreneurial and more ambitious in my side hustle because of that 9-to-5, which if I were transitioning would make that transition in some ways potentially even easier, because I'm able to almost assume more risk on the entrepreneurial side than I would if this was needing to pay the bills. I just had to take whatever came through the door. But anyway, so there's pros and cons. It's exhausting to be wearing both hats at the same time, but it's, you know, a riskless proposition if you've got this 9-to-5 as well and you're just letting this grow. And, you know, Charlie and I are both in service-based businesses, but I've seen people build incredible e-commerce empires while full-time students, for example. They're going and taking a test and coming home and checking their e-commerce stats and watching that growth grow. So whether it's a CPG product or a service-based business or anything, even a food truck that you're going to turn into a restaurant, it can often start in that kind of minimum viable product early stage where you've got revenue, but it's not yet requiring your full time, which is different than that ETA situation. So I completely agree with you. That can be a huge pro for the 0 to 1.
And you're right. It can be a con, right? It's pretty hard to do both. And that is an advantage to jumping in fully, is that you don't have to try and juggle. And then knowing all the secrets is another pro. We talked about the scary things that happen in ETA, but boy, you're going to know your business so well, intimately. You're going to know every number. You're going to know every client you've ever talked to, especially at the early stages. It's so easy to know all 100 people you've talked to versus coming into a company with a list where everyone is maybe just put into a number instead of a personal relationship.
Yeah. And I'll lump that in with another major pro for me, which is that 0 to 1 process, because you're involved in all those details, is the best education you don't have to pay for. I mean, it's the best education you can get, really. Like, you are going to learn and grow so much in those early stages. Now, don't get me wrong. In ETA, you're going to learn and grow a lot as well, but there's really no substitute for having to solve all the problems and wear all the hats to become an expert networker and to, structure your business to bring in the help you need. An incredible journey, that 0 to 1. And it's a confidence builder. We talk all the time on this podcast about expertise. A lot of expertise is built in that 0 to 1 journey that you go for. You understand your customers deeply. You understand your supply chain deeply because you were the one that had to organize it and sit down and meet with them and sell at that farmer's market before you got your big break or whatever it is. There's just so much value in those early moments in terms of your human capital as an entrepreneur. But there's some major cons to that pathway as well. I think the one that's most obvious is you've got to prove you're right about it. The uncertainty is just huge, right? Like, you could be spending years trying to bring something about, never knowing when it's going to catch fire. And that's obviously a stressful situation to be in.
Yeah, I think it was last episode you talked about the Ferris wheels in every state and every city.
It's going to be big.
It's going to be big. Yeah, that might not work because the customer might not care, right? And that's, I think, the biggest worry about 0 to 1. And that's why even if you're going to be super risky in a side hustle, I always recommend selling that first one before you even consider jumping. Even if it starts as a side hustle and even if it's time consuming and hard, make sure you have a proof of concept first and at least one client to kind of base it off.
The other one, to tell people just real quick, I think the risk of failure can be 0. Like, I can guarantee if you're committed to the entrepreneurial process, I can guarantee you will be successful. But I cannot tell you the time frame in which you will be successful. And that's the uncertainty you're accepting. If you're all in, you can find a market, you can cater to a customer base, you can build the product or the service. Like, you can be successful. You can do it. You can build something big. You can build $1 trillion company. But I cannot tell you how long it's going to take you. And you can't possibly predict a lot of the time. You've only got 24 hours in the day. And even if you're the fastest moving, hardest working entrepreneur in the world, there might be 10 pivots between you and success, and those 10 pivots could happen over a 20-year time span in some cases, or in 2 months, right? But that's what's important. Since you don't have a proven track record like an ETA, you're accepting the uncertainty and the time frame that you're kind of unaware of.
Yeah, and kind of going into that too, right? Like, is the salary and revenue? Are you going to be able to pay yourself? And are you putting most of that money back into the business to kind of grow it, to get that initial setup? If you have to pay for manufacturing, like, that's expensive and it takes a little bit up front. And so if you can do any selling, then that probably goes to your contracts. It probably doesn't go to your pocket. And it's going to take a while before you see dividends from your business.
I work with a lot of very successful entrepreneurs, and the early years of their companies tend to be really depressing. Like, they are living off of, a mortgaged home and just draining their savings or eating ramen. Like, there's usually some lean times. And it's not true of every industry. Again, your path has been surprisingly lucrative for you, much quicker than you thought. Those early days panned out better than you expected, but you still took a hit to your day job right out the gate.
Yeah, and I think that's important to understand too, right? Like, I don't think, well, I guess there are probably exceptions to this and probably quite a few, but most of what I've seen is it takes a long time before, well, a long time is relative. It takes some time before you can actually see the revenue. And if it's a year to 5 years, it really can depend and vary. ETA kind of wins out on that front, I think, in a lot of ways. And I think that's why a lot of my clients are ETA focused is because of that. And then a lot of the 0 to 1s, they've been in business a long time and they're realizing they need help now. Whereas ETA, it's like, hey, I need help at the beginning to understand what's going on, right? And so it's just different on how it works. I'm trying to think of the fastest 0 to 1 client I have who went from
So
0 to 1.
I helped some students who launched their business in September, and by December, I think they had K ARR, annual recurring revenue. And
that's impressive.
I think 12 months, well, it hasn't been 12 months later. So what has it been? 10 months later? I think they're closer to $500,000 ARR. This is a 2-person team.
Wow.
It's a very low touch business in some cases. I think by the end of the year, they're expecting to have 7 figures ARR. So, and again, that was truly a 0 to 1, but they did have industry experience that informed their path, right? So I've had other students have raise over $1 million within 8 months of them starting their company. But between those first 8 months, their salary was 0, and now they're just now closing. That's a very quick time frame to close venture capital, but they'll finally have that salary if they choose. They might not even choose to pay themselves a salary yet if they can get away with it. Venture capital does not mean lush lifestyle for most entrepreneurs. But so those are 2 examples of pretty quick time frames, 4 to 8 months, and they're cash flowing enough or have raised enough that they can pay themselves decently well.
Well, something kind of to that point too, right? We talked about the timeline it takes, but that doesn't really include how much time you're spending. And we touched on it a little bit talking about my side hustle, but I was spending 10 to 20 hours a week outside of my 9 to 5, and I had kids, and it wasn't necessarily the most fun, but there is a huge time investment, even on a 0 to 1 side hustle type endeavor, if you want to make it a full-time gig.
Yeah.
And I'd be curious how much those students worked before they could actually get to that point, because I bet it was quite a bit.
Right. Yeah. There's the time when you officially start your business, and there's the time all the months beforehand that you were organizing and getting it ready. Yeah, that's a good distinction to make. And those are the unseen hours, right? Those are the, for every those 2 emails that end up landing you that client, where there was the 1,000 you sent before, and the agonizing hours you spent structuring those pitch emails, right? Like I always
changing everyone's name to be personalized and making sure you were putting something from their LinkedIn profile into the message.
Exactly, stalking them on LinkedIn, classic. Yeah. I always tell people your business will try to eat all of your time. It's like a needy child. It will crawl up onto your lap and be like, but what about me? Like there's client emails to answer. There's taxes to start looking into. It will, even before you've launched, it'll try to eat up as much of your time, and you only got 24 hours in the day. So that 0 to 1 compared to the ETA, the 0 to 1 will try to eat all 24 of your hours, essentially.
Yeah.
It's a little bit easier to give yourself a 9 to 5 in that ETA space. A little bit easier.
A little sometimes. It depends. If you come into a lot of paperwork that you have to get done that you didn't know about, but it's funny we're talking about this because it's not even just the time. So I have forced my wife, for better or worse, into starting a business, and it hasn't taken off. We haven't made that first sale yet. So we're really
this is exciting.
Yeah, this is totally new, and I'm not going to divulge too much. Hopefully at some point we can talk about it because it's been really fun for me. And I told her, hey, I'll do the whole back end. That's what my expertise is in. And she just has to create the product. And she's an expert in the field, so it totally works. I think will be a good business, but we'll see. But I just got off the phone with her for lunch. And she was saying how this is consuming her mind. This is what she's thinking about constantly. And she's working a 9 to 5, and she has a great job, and she loves her job. And the plan is not for her to quit anytime soon. But it's funny because now she's kind of appreciating what I was always talking about, is like, this consumes my mind. It's all I can think about. It's constantly what I'm coming back to. I'm always talking to her about it. She probably hated my guts the first year, 6 months, as I was just talking about it incessantly. But I think we talk about time investment as outside of work, 10 hours. Mm-hmm. But I think in a lot of ways, it consumes a lot more of your time than you realize too.
Last week, I officially landed a client for about a contract that's in the range of about $50,000. It took me a full 9 months of work to finally start that project. Now, they're not paying me for the 9 months it took me to just get them as a client. Okay. So if they'd said no, that would have been 9 months of work that I would never have anything to show for it, right? And now that I've got them, after that 9 months of work, they're paying me $50,000 for the work I will do for them, right? And so I'm really, it's a great client. I'm really excited about the project I'm doing for them. But that was a long 9 months. It was a lot of mental energy, emotional energy, time. I had so many meetings with them where we were starting back at square one for no apparent reason, where I was, footballed off to a different decision maker. And, it was just this kind of purgatory that maybe never would have yielded fruits. And that's just the nature of 0 to 1, is you spend so much time and energy on things that may never yield fruit. And you don't know which of all of these things you're working on are going to be the successful, finally the breakthrough, so to speak. So yeah, I think not having that blueprint or that kind of existing customer base that ETA has means, your time investment and your emotional investment, your mind space investment in 0 to 1 is huge. And that can definitely be a pretty big cost. So let's think about it. So the pros we listed for 0 to 1, easy to start as a side hustle. That's nice. You can dip your toe. You can grow with your business. You know all the secrets of your business. You're in the weeds with it, which means you're developing expertise and a familiarity with every aspect of your business that can give you confidence moving forward and really inform your strategy. Some cons. Do you want to go over some of the cons?
Yeah, you have to prove the concept. It has to actually work. That's what me and my wife are struggling with right now, is trying to get that MVP out the door and sold. It requires a ton of time and a loss of salary, and it's going to take a while to get that salary. And then just the uncertainty and the time investment that you have to give to something that might not even work can be pretty difficult and are some pretty big cons to work with. Okay, so now we've talked about ETA and 0 to 1. I want to talk about what I've seen in the industry, and I don't know everyone, but is a lot of times that people will say either ETA is the only way or they'll say 0 to 1 is the only way. And I don't believe that's true. So I want to talk a little bit about what businesses work really well in the 0 to 1 and what businesses work really well in the ETA. And that's not saying that there's not overlap and there's not differences. And just because we say it works better as a 0 to 1 doesn't mean that you can't do an ETA. But I kind of want to break this down a little bit for people to understand when to pursue which path.
I think we'll definitely continue this conversation on other podcasts, going in the weeds of, again, if you're thinking about buying a business, you should have these characteristics and these types of things. But I think the big question to answer is, especially with ETA, how much would it take for me to recreate what I'm buying here, right? Because there's some businesses where it's like, sure, you could buy this business for, say, $500,000, or you could spend 6 months and just recreate everything, right? That they've got, right? So, what are you actually buying in this business, and how difficult is it to reproduce? Because there's some things that are very hard to reproduce. If you've got branding that is, your customers love and they know where to look for your product, that's huge. If you've got, customers that you've got fixed contracts with, that's awesome. But if you're just a logo and some equipment and a plucky team, that's something that you can just create on your own with relatively low effort and risk. And it doesn't necessarily make sense to buy that. And so some industries fall more or less in these categories. And it's really a case-by-case basis. I'm not sure there's a blanket rule that we can apply to this.
There's definitely not. And it depends on the size too, right? So I usually use the example of 0 to 1 being better for like a cleaning business or a lawn care, where there are just so many people in the market, and if you bought the business, there's no guarantee people are going to stay, and it's pretty easy to find clients. It's harder to hold on to clients than it is to find them. Having said that, if you purchased a $10 million lawn care company that owns a huge swath, right, and has multiple operators, then that's a different story completely. And so I 100% agree that not everything fits, but I can kind of tell you my side of it, right? So I was offered to buy a CPA firm, and I ended up not doing it, mainly because of the cons we talked about above. And at the point where I would have bought it, I realized it would take me a year or less to get to the same revenue number. And I wouldn't have had to deal with all the skeletons, and I wouldn't have had to deal with the debt that would have been significant. And so for me, it was very much, why would I do this? I can take out a loan on myself, if you will, right, to build up the business. And it was a better deal. But, I couldn't go out and buy a $5 million CPA firm. If I had that kind of money, then maybe that would have been a different discussion. I was looking at less than $500,000, right? Which would have been in my purchasing power, but then it doesn't really make any sense because I could build up to that pretty quickly.
Yeah. Yep. I think that's exactly the logic, right? And we've talked about where competitive advantage comes from, right? And as you're purchasing a business, that's what you got to ask. Is there something advantageous here, right? Do they have some resource that's unique to this firm where it's like, man, if I had that, whether it's, patent or whether it's a customer relationship, again, a really strong brand that I'll never be able to really compete with. If they've got those types of things, that's really what you're buying a lot of the time. And again, every case is so different, right? Well, a business at a certain price might be a no-brainer, which at another price would not be worth touching with a 10-foot pole. So it's the devil's in the details, which is why working with someone like Charlie, who can really go into the details of what the structure of this company is, what the financials, what are their assets, these types of things are really key. And we'll do whole episodes on it.
Yeah.
But you posed the question, what businesses make sense and what don't? And I think that's a good question. But I'd end on the thought of what makes sense for you. And there's a lot that plays into that. But as you think about these pros and cons about your risk profile, are you a visionary? I want to build something that's never been done before. Are you operationally minded where you're like, I just want to take over and tinker and improve and build? Different people be drawn to different entrepreneurial paths, and there's really not a right one. They're all good. They all can be life-changing. They can all be, just transformational, honestly, in every sense. Your satisfaction in your life, your financial trajectory, the impact you're having in your community, like truly transformational. So as we've gone through these pros and cons, what feels right to you? What fits, your soul and your heart and your goals, and your current needs, so to speak, and let that guide you kind of, you decide.
Thanks for listening to the Unsexy Entrepreneurship podcast. Seth and I want to continually improve and make sure that we're covering the topics that you as an entrepreneur really want help with, but we need your help with that, and here's how. So first, please like and subscribe to the show wherever you're getting your podcast. We want this to get into as many hands of entrepreneurs as possible. It could really help make their business a success. Secondly, leave us a review on your podcast app. We read each and every single one of those comments, and it really helps us in our planning to make this tailored for you as an entrepreneur. And lastly, send us your questions directly. Just click the link in the episode description and you'll be able to contact us directly, as well as get notified of upcoming shows and value-added content. So we look forward to hearing from you, and we'll be back next week. Thank you.